it's my pleasure to introduce to you RTD, the Sacramento, San Joaquin Regional Transit District's Chief of Administration and Innovation, Mike Thompson. And to me, as far as I'm concerned, he's an IT guru because he not only knows the IT portion of what he does, but also knows the business, and he can blend the two together. And I think that is a very important skill to have. It's not just the computer as it is, as I've always said, nothing stands alone. No one stands alone. And so a field is, or an area of expertise is not useful unless it blends in with another area in business. And so Mike, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been at RTD now for almost 10 years. After working in the San Francisco Bay Area for a couple of decades, just leave it like that, with some major high-tech companies, and doing 5 or 6 years of consulting on the side, and then working with RTD I started out as a consultant, now working up to Chief Administration and Innovation. So it's been a ride. It's been fun working with Gloria the whole time, so I've enjoyed that like crazy. So my background basically was in IT, but I got an MBA as well. So I've kind of got the blend. I can do the tech, and I understand most of the business stuff. Some of the high finance stuff that Gloria will talk about. That it's kind of beyond me, but I'm more than happy to listen in and try to figure out what's going on and try to understand what's happening. And my particular skill is trying to bring how can technology, if it can help, how can it help to resolve problems or make things better or streamline activities, and just finding innovative solutions to business kind of problems. So that's kind of what I bring to the plate.
Thank you, Mike. And the audience is probably wondering, this subject is about budgeting and financial management, and here I am talking about IT. It's simply because we don't things manually anymore. If we do a lot of things manually, there is a problem. And so all the information now, for the most part, we rely on information taken from the different systems of the organization. So let me start asking you questions. So what are some of the typical IT systems in transit, Mike?
Well, like any business, they have an ERP system and enterprise resource planning, which is the financing and all the purchase orders and all that kind of normal, I'll say normal, but things that all companies have to deal with, just getting the finances organized and going there. Of course, the transit has different things because it's government. It has grants, accounting they have to do, and some things are a little different, but the bottom line is you have a finance system of some sort. And if you have a fleet, of course, and you have some kind of fleet maintenance software, and there are all different varieties of them, but it's about keeping track of your PMIs and tracking repairs and how much money and labor and that kind of thing you spend on them. And then the rest of the stuff that's kind of different about transit is you have things like software for your fare boxes, or you have maybe mobile apps to buy and sell tickets. You have, for publishing out information, you have GTFS, which is really specific to transit. You maybe have displays for customers at the various stops you have. You have, of course, your operational systems for tracking your buses and tracking drivers and planning routes and scheduling and labor tracking and on and on and on and on. There's just a bunch of stuff that's really specific to transit. But the bottom line is they all have to sit on top of a really good ERP system to be able to track the cost and know stuff and be able to do what you need to do so you can get your grants reliably and you can show that you're working properly and all that kind of stuff. And the customers then will come along with whatever operational systems you have for GTFS and customer information and driver paying drivers and all that kind of important stuff that we do to make sure we actually get service on the street.
And on top of that, there is what we call a business intelligence system. So what does it do?
So business intelligence systems typically just pull information from all your other systems, your ERP, your operational systems, your fare box systems, and consolidate it in so you get a complete view of your business from here's the routes, here's the ridership you had, and here's how much you spent on, depending on how you do it, how much you spent to operate that service on a per hour basis or per passenger basis or whatever, but that consolidates it all into one place instead of having to go to your ERP system and get a report out and put it on a spreadsheet, and go into your transit system and getting a report out and put it on a spreadsheet, and then try to figure out how to merge all those things together into some giant spreadsheet. which is just a nightmare. So your information says your BIS system will pull all that for you automatically and hopefully generate you some really good metrics, see some trend line, able to do projections on where things are going or not going, and give you some early warnings to maybe potential problems with like ridership or underperforming routes and that kind of stuff.
And these are a lot of systems that you are providing oversight for. Can you share with us some of the challenges you've encountered in your oversight of these systems, including problems with the users?
Opportunities with users, I think, is the
That's
right
a good
word.
one. That's a more diplomatic way of saying it. You know, it's
Yes.
always been diplomatic, so that's what I love about Mike.
On the system side, they're typical IT systems. There's nothing really particularly exciting about them. I think, they have database, they have applications and that kind of stuff. Where we run into problems is kind of, as you said, kind of on the border between the IT part and the business part, in that a lot of these systems are very consolidated, so they impact a large part of the business. And so getting through a testing cycle can be very onerous, especially for a smaller organization where you have to take people offline for weeks or months, or for a very long time potentially, to go through and test to make sure the system is actually working like it's supposed to be working. And that relies on having people on the users, I'll say user side for lack of a more diplomatic term, that really understand not only what their task is, but understand the business. Because part of the problem is you get people that are my experience has been a lot of people are very focused on their specific task, and they test their task and they say my task worked, but they don't know that who's feeding them the data or where their data goes. So they don't have an idea of what it looked like it worked to me, but it actually fell over someplace else. And then I don't know. And so you have to get a lot of people in a room to be able to have even a conversation about how the business flows through the whole system. And you'll always have people say, "Oh, I didn't know it did that," because it's very narrowly focused on their little task. And I don't know if it's a specific thing with transit, but there seems to be kind of a lack of curiosity outside of their task on what other people are doing around them, or how the system feeds from the finance system into the transit, or how the purchase orders result in parts arriving. Like, well, I don't know, it just happens. And it makes it very difficult to find to troubleshoot problems, or if you have a problem, it's hard to get a report. You get reports like, "Oh, the system's broken, can you fix it?" Well, the IT people are not content experts. They won't know. Broken to them means the system is not running. So, "Oh, no, system's running. What's the problem?" "Well, these are, you get a lot of weird messages. So you spend a lot of time going back and forth. What are you looking at? Can you send me a screen? And they try to describe what they're doing. And the IT people kind of have to part it together, saying, "Oh, that's because this information comes from this other system." And you have to work through that. Um, when you have people that really understand their business very well, they just naturally learn the system, and they get curious, they learn other parts of it. So they're very helpful in trying to say, "Hey, you know what we can do better, or we can take advantage of this function of the system that we're not today," and really build a really good relationship that can really move the organization forward quite a bit better than the IT guys trying to string together a bunch of people who are very task focused into what are we trying to do here? Because the IT guys don't know the content for the most part.
And sometimes that becomes a very unrealistic expectation that you be the content expert. So if there's something wrong, you can't really judge the functionality of the system without the help of the subject matter expert or the user, correct?
Exactly. You can see the system is running. There's nothing wrong with the system running, but how do you know it's not working correctly? Well, that's when they have to come and say, "Here's what's going on." Oh, right.
So this is where, the limitation of the system, the computer will work, but the maximum use of the system is also a function of, how the user is going to use it and explore it later in
Yeah.
order to figure out any opportunities to maximize the use of the system and also to streamline their processes. Sometimes that's the one missing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And a lot of these systems that you run across, they have a tremendous set of capabilities. And when you go to purchase them, you may have purchased them to solve a specific problem. And if you have users who are really kind of interested, they'll poke around and find other things in the system, say, "Hey, you know what else we can do with this thing?" And then you see all these people that, I won't say all these people, you have a lot of people that are kind of operating outside of the system by having spreadsheets of everything, and they merge these spreadsheets and then they'll type in something over here. Well, the system a lot of times can do a lot of that. And so you start getting rid of these spreadsheets and all the information flows back into the system so that it can feed easily a BIS system. So you get better visibility of what your business is doing rather than relying on, Billy Bob, who's not here this week. He has a great spreadsheet that has this in it. Well, it doesn't help us. He's not here. No one knows else how he does this stuff. So if you have curious users that are really interested in the business itself, they'll branch out and look at other parts of the system and really maybe identify an opportunity to do something that we're doing manually today or with spreadsheets and just put it in the system. It'll happen automatically for us. So you can get some big wins when you have users that are really engaged in their business and how the business operates and the systems that they're using.
And of course, it makes it worse whenever you have a turnover of staff, right? And then you have these, the blind leading the blind, the individual is being taught by somebody with the limited use of the system, which further limits the new user.
Yeah, a kind of an ongoing training seems to be a kind of a problem for pretty much everybody. In that, maybe you bought the system 5 years ago and everybody got trained at that point, but since then there was only one guy who was there for that original training, and they're working off of not even from a manual. They're working off of some notes somebody took, or they came in, and the person was there for a day before they left. They said, just do this. And so, they get very, very narrow focused on, I was trained on how to click this, click that, type this, and click there, as opposed to what they're trying to accomplish from a business perspective and how the system interacts. So it gets worse and worse and worse. And pretty soon your people are not even using the system. They're back to spreadsheets because they can see what they're doing there. And then they're typing data from their spreadsheet into the system at the end, because a lot of times they're not properly trained to be able to use the system that organizations have paid a lot of money for. These systems are very, very expensive on an ongoing basis.
And you probably have answered this question. How do you ensure maximum use of the system? Or is it your responsibility to make that determination?
From an IT perspective, of course, we need to make sure the system performs so that people can actually use it and it doesn't crash every time they do stuff. So strictly from that point of view, we need to make sure the system is properly sized and the environment it operates in, et cetera, is properly sized. And the people have the equipment they need to be able to use the system, so they're not working off a 20-year-old PC or something like that. They need some modern equipment. Beyond that, it's really kind of up to the business to say, hey, we think what we're doing seems really clunky or old-fashioned. There's got to be a better way of doing it. And then working with the IT people, they can say, oh, okay, well, we can change your securities to have bigger access to the system. Maybe you can explore and find some stuff, or let's talk to the vendor and talk about our problem we're having. And they make it, oh, why aren't you using this module or that function or whatever? And then you can see get more and more use. But if the people that are using the system are strictly looking at their task, it's almost impossible to get to, are we adequately using this great asset we have in this system?
This is related too. So how do you know that the reports being generated by these systems are reliable? Or are you actually the right party to judge that?
Beyond that, the systems, the scheduled reports or the system is up and running, kind of really not. So we rely on when they first got the system, hopefully they went through a whole testing cycle to say, yes, we verified this system is working correctly. And when we put our data in, the results we're seeing are consistent with what we would expect to see. So that they say, at least at the get-go, we knew it was working correctly. Now, of course, systems evolve and they get patches and things break. But if the users don't really even understand what the respected result is, it's just a report that runs. And I've talked to several people and they have, oh yes, this report runs, and I just file it away. I don't even look at it. I don't even know what it's for. I don't know why I even get it. I say, wow, what's happening there? Maybe there's a problem that that report is saying, oh my gosh, stop. And they're like, I don't know. And it blows up in audit a year later or something like that, when they said, why weren't you looking at these reports? And it's really up to the business users to know what their business is, and we can't force them to know it.
And I have another question that's kind of related to the question before this, but I'm trying to prove a point in terms of what the expectation should be from the systems and from the users, right? How do you maintain the integrity of data generated by the various systems?
That's a question. I don't know if I'm understanding. I'm kind of heading back to my IT side. So, of course, there should be checks and balances on the process side to go through and say, you know, we have this process, we check our totals, these things pie out. We're not missing stuff. You have PMI KPIs to go through and saying we should be doing this many of that or this many of this. The other ones, here's our ratios for these kind of things. If they get out of whack, you say, hey, something's going on here. But in terms of just reliable data, I hate to say it, but garbage in, garbage out.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, the IT people won't know. It's like, well, you put the data in, what's wrong with it? So I might not be understanding your question exactly. So
there's much reliance on the critical thinking of the user and the business judgment or discernment of the user.
Absolutely.
And give you a feedback, because if it is caused by any glitch in the system, you can fix it, but there has to be a trigger.
Yes.
And that trigger has to come from the user. If there's any abnormality or anything significantly different from the expectation, from the expected result, whether it be in report or any calculation generated by the system. So there is a reasonable expectation by the user. And then if there's anything abnormal, unless there is a story behind that, you know, they have to turn to you and say, is this driven by a glitch? Because I don't have any story to tell behind any significant fluctuation in the in my expectation.
And at that point, you might have to go back to the vendor, because it could be a bug. You put a patch in and suddenly the totals are not working right, or they're doubling or something. It's like, oh, this is wrong. This is clearly wrong. Same report from 1 month to the next month, and now it's doubled.
And that's the formula for success, right? It's not just the successful installation and configuration of the system, but the continuing use and development of use by the user, so that number one, you can maximize the functionalities, use of the functionalities of the system, and that you can also really get the accurate data that you need through a repetitive process that's done by the computer. So the critical thinking really still rests upon the user.
Exactly. And the variability of the business is not such that, you know, from week to week it doubles or cuts in half or something. So they have a feel for this number should be about that.
Correct.
And it was like, hey, there's something weird going on here. Why are we not getting our ticket vending machines coughing up the money? Something's going on here. And you can work backwards and try to find out what might be happening there, as an example. But they have an idea of what the numbers should be roughly.
Right. And because we are, there's a lot of systems that make up a transit organization. Almost all the departments are relying on a specific system that they use for their day-to-day activities. You also have some internal controls associated with level of access to ensure the integrity of the data, to ensure that there's security in accessing the data for changes or for approvals or for those kind of things, right?
Right, and audit logs, things like that. So if someone does say, hey, you know, this has changed, with a good audit log, you can go say, oh yeah, it was changed by the person that sits right next to you last week. Oh, I forgot, you know, or someone was out sick and someone else had to cover for them and they made a mistake. But that kind of stuff you can usually tease out after you go through if they identify a problem. And, you know, don't wait 3 years and say, you know, that was wrong a long time ago and it's been wrong ever since. Wow, good luck recovering from that one. You can correct the problem, but you need to, when you see the problem, you got to report it right away so we can get on top of it and hopefully resolve it before it becomes a bigger problem.
And your change management is documented as well, correct? So
oh yes, and so maybe that's one of the other issues we have, is because testing and stuff takes so long to get through the cycle. We don't upgrade as often as the vendors may like us to, and so we kind of start lagging behind, and then it's a bigger jump. But some of these vendors are cranking out stuff every 3 or 4 months. You can hardly keep up with it, and a lot of it, because you're not using the entire suite of the functions the system has, they may be changing something over on the side that you don't even care about. So you say, well, we'll skip that release, we'll skip this release, and next thing you know, you've missed a lot of stuff, and now you have to go through a big testing cycle. So there's a balance. How often you want to dedicate resources to testing systems to make sure they're working correctly when you upgrade, versus wait every 5 years and upgrade. It's a tough one, and I think when we go to more hosted systems, or like PeopleSoft, or the things that are hosted up in the cloud by the vendor, they're constantly patching that thing, and so they may have introduced a bug and you wouldn't even know it for a while. Then you go, well, when did this happen? And so working backwards with the vendors on when you identify problems, you need to get it right away so you can get those corrected. Because you didn't explicitly do anything to upgrade the system. It just kind of happened one weekend, and now it doesn't work the same. And is that on purpose or not? You really have to keep track of your changes, and there's a lot of reading to just keep up with all these vendors making changes for the hosted type systems.
And you know, since we rely so much on system generated reports, I just want to mention that IT now is a highly audited area. It didn't used to be when things were done mostly manually, but now they're highly audited area. Before the auditors start reading the reports, they go to the IT department and look into their change management documentation. Who has access to what?
Right.
And is there going to be a conflict of interest? Is there enough segregation of
duties, yeah.
access of duties, right? That's the translation of segregation of duties in actual processing. There's also segregation of duties when it comes to electronic processing. And the auditors need to have reliance on that security and access of information before they can determine the level of reliance they can have on any computer generated report.
Yes.
And so you get as many audits as the finance team, the grants team, and even the procurement team. So those are the four.
I don't know. Those
highly
finance
audited
guys are audited
areas.
a
I
lot.
audited a lot, right?
But we do get a
Yeah.
lot of that kind of stuff, like compared
Yeah.
to what it used to be. That's for sure. Which is
Right.
fair enough. It's not outrageous in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
They're not open up this thing and show me these bits or any of that kind of stuff. But they want to see that you have processes to control when employees are hired or fired or, excuse me, terminated, leave. Are we processing through and turning off their access? Are we doing those kind of things? And so
Right.
there's a lot of documentation on that. And of course, checking all your backups and your recovery processes and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Just ensure
Right.
that if there is a problem, the finance team is not going to be stuck on a log saying, hell, we forgot to back our system up for the last 2 years. It happens. Not to us, but to some other people.
Have you experienced any violation of access, any violation of security in IT, whether it be external or internal?
I think in terms of purposely trying to get access stuff, not that we're aware of, what we have caught up in a couple of these virus type things, and we have seen people trying to break into the system, but as far as we know, we have caught them and stopped that when we run across those things. We're not aware of any what we'll call exfiltration of data out of our systems. But in terms of internal people doing stuff, we're not aware of anybody doing that. We keep them pretty well locked down to what they need to do. And at least in our organization, it's not so big that you don't know when someone's moved to a different department, they no longer need to have access to that system. So, and we keep it turned down pretty quickly. So we're very much worried about that kind of thing happening, especially people that are on their way out the door. We want to make sure that we lock down stuff and that we're backing up. They still have access to their files, but we take snapshots real regularly to make sure that if something suddenly disappears, we can put it all back when the person leaves.
And every once in a while, we receive all these hoax emails asking somebody to cut a check. But because we have good internal controls and people are very familiar with our approval processes and systems, that they could just detect immediately that the email they have received is a bogus one, right?
Yeah, that's the hope. I think the kind of normally, even in security companies, you still see about 20% of the people will click on those kind of links or take action on them, even if you're supposed to be aware of that kind of stuff. They used to be really obvious, I should say, the Nigerian prince kind of thing. And now it's like, hey, the CEO wants this. You got to get on it right away. Or here's the attachment you asked for, blah, blah, blah. I want you to look at it right away. And bang, you're dead. And it happens that fast anymore. It's crazy. So making sure you have really good backups. So when that does happen, because it will happen to you eventually, that you can recover quickly and keep people moving forward on their business. So we don't want to have people sitting around saying, when's the system going to be back up? Oh, another week and a half. Not good.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a lot of information, Mike. Where do you see technology is, how do you see it evolve in transit?
So a couple different ways. Of course, I think probably the most exciting way to me is the stuff that's on the vehicles, going from these not picking on any particular vendor, but from these old dedicated kind of custom built, effectively hardened computers to things like it's an iPhone or it's an iPad just mounted on the bus, and it does all the stuff the old one used to do, except if it breaks, you just go to the store and buy another one and flop it down and bolt it in and you're ready to go. And it provides better information. The maps are always up to date. I think that's just kind of it's going to be a game changer. And I wouldn't want to be in a dedicated hardware business anymore for vehicles. So I think that's really kind of pretty dramatic. And of course, now that we have LTE pretty much everywhere, you can get so much better information so quick compared to the old radio-based systems that you can tell where a bus was within the last 5 or 6 seconds. That's a breakthrough, and that makes a difference to the customer too. When they look at their app, they say, "Hey, here comes the bus." And they look up, and there it is. They go, "Wow, hey, this app is good stuff." And you get people say, "Now I can start maybe buying tickets," and you get other things kind of leveraging off of that. And of course, the ability to do peek in on video. If someone a covert alarm goes off, you could peek in the video and see what's going on and help the police do stuff like that. On the server side of the house, I think the cloud part is kind of still up in the air because it's still very expensive compared to in-house hosted. And of course, with our grant process, we get money for buying equipment. You don't get money to say an ongoing subscription to a service that maybe costs you $6,000 or $7,000 a month. And I think that's kind of the challenge we're having with vendors moving towards more of the vendor itself hosting the software. I think that's probably a win. But again, once it's inexpensive, before you could kind of play with your vendors, I'll say play, maybe not the right word, but you could negotiate with them on your license if you didn't like how much you're paying. Nowadays, they say, "Hey, you don't want to pay? Your system is off and you're done. You have no access to it." Kind of scary. So you're almost kind of being held hostage a little bit. So, but then again, you're getting patches. They're updating it constantly. It's constantly getting better and better and better. So pros and cons, and you have to really think about what you want to do there. What's your strategy? Do you want to own everything? You have to have your IT staff ramped up for that, or do you want to have the vendor own it? Then you need to kind of very different IT staff, and you have to deal with the challenge of we need to be able to pay these guys always and forever, and maybe a lot of money every month. It's a challenge.
So there's a lot of systems being introduced almost every day. The systems do change every day. There's a number of vendors that produce a variety of systems.
Yes.
What decision tools do you use in selecting the right software for your agency?
I think a big part of it is the philosophy of the agency, frankly, saying, like I said before, do you want to really feel like you own everything and you have control over it? Or are you willing to gamble on things and let vendors host them and that kind of thing? And then you can do some different things. So like typically the transit systems have been very large conglomerated systems. It does everything that you could ever want. You can do everything you need to do in this one system. They're huge. They're very expensive to operate. They're hard to train. They change slowly. But they are very effective. They work very, very well. And the other approach is more like what you're saying, which is these new little companies are popping up all the time, but they have a very narrow functionality. This system will do run cutting for you, but wow, it's awesome. This system will do planning for you. This thing will look at Title VI and do analysis and figure out where you are. Boom, boom, boom. But now you have to buy, instead of buying one system with one big check, you have to buy 20 or 30 systems. And if they need to talk, you have to work with the vendor to integrate. Do they have an API so you can integrate, or are they walled off and then say, well, we don't want to deal with you anyway, even if you are the best in class, because we want to be able to get our data in and out of these systems. And then will the vendor work with people, or will they say, we will host and we'll do this and we'll work with whoever you want us to work with to make this thing work? That's great. Then you can go to a best in breed model as opposed to a one-stop shop. Pros and cons, again, if you have a very small IT shop, you might need to go to the one-stop shop just because you can't support having 30 different apps that could go wrong at different times and having people know how to deal with them.
So is that a weakness if you have the best of
breed?
Each module, right? And then they all connect, right? Because you were able to make it so that they have an open architecture, open system that will connect with each other so that they can form like a single system for the entire organization. Is that typical? Is that the better approach than to have one highly proprietary system that professes to be able to do everything, but really not?
Well, I think in the non-transit world, getting that kind of critical one leg up on your competitors is a big deal. So there's not in transit, in my opinion, there's not a really competitive advantage to having the best in class route planning system, because there's not anybody else going to say, I can plan a route better than you and take over your business from you. It's kind of not going to happen. Completely different kinds of business, and I'll use Uber as an example of something that's completely different than how you've always done fixed route. Could come in and maybe have an impact on you, but it's very different. They're not going to come over and say, I can shave 3% off of what it cost you to do this by running my own special system. So pros and cons, yeah. The other thing about the newer systems that are really task focused is those things are really streamlined to do exactly what that is. So they're much more intuitive to use. Now, the other downside, of course, is if you have to use more than several of them, each one of them is different. So they don't have the same look and feel, and maybe the field names are even different. So you go, oh, wait, that's this one, and you have to kind of keep track of if you're trying to use them. In terms of the API to connect the data and have it flow back and forth, that's what it's there for. That's exactly what it's there for, to enable that kind of thing. You still have to know what your business is and how it moves through all these systems, and it may kind of change and take different names and different requirements across that. So it could be a bigger burden on your end users as well, if they have to play multiple roles in their job. If they're dedicated to one thing, they wouldn't notice it. They'd love it because this thing is tuned for what they do all day long.
But then again, there are systems, and then you have the business. These systems are meant to streamline your processes and provide to you the data that you need to be able to make good business decisions. But then it's also a function of how the users are using the system, so that it can produce the right amount and the right kind and the right level of information that you would like for you to be able to make business decisions. So they're all related. There has to be a knowledge of both the system and the business, and you got to be able to merge them, so that you can tell the system to give you the information that you need, right?
Yes.
To make good business decisions.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you very much. This is quite an interview. Thank you very much for agreeing to enlighten us about your role as an IT person as it relates to the general or the overall business of the organization.
You're welcome. Thank you much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.